All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Angela Gargano. It's September 11th, 2025, and we're at Amity, her home in Amity. Angela, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
First question to get things started, as you probably know, is why wine?
Why wine? So many reasons. I think why wine personally is that it's endlessly fascinating. It's one of the few subjects that just encompasses everything. If you're interested in history, there's so much history in wine. If you're interested in science, gastronomy, you like to travel, there are just so many things that keep wine endlessly fascinating. And then I think why wine in terms of why it's important, it's really about how it connects people. And I grew up in a Sicilian family, and it just was always part of our lives and on the table. And I think it's something that brings people together in a unlike anything else. And so to me, it's just a connector, and it's having it at the table is just what makes something a celebration and what brings beauty and joy to our everyday lives. And I think that's really important, and there's not enough of that in our lives. And I think when we talk about wine right now, there's such a discussion in the media and just in sort of the zeitgeist about alcohol. And I do think that wine is sort of its own category. Like, yes, of course, there's alcohol, and I don't want to in any way discount people's struggle with that. But I also think that wine is something that is usually drunk in moderation with food. And it kind of is a different category for me. And it's really about pleasure and joy and slowing down. I mean, to some extent, wine can be enjoyed just smelling it, just taking a small sip. And I think that's probably how I was first introduced to wine. Growing up in a Sicilian family and a restaurant family, we were always allowed to have like a little taste and a little sip. I know some Italian families grew up mixing water and wine, but my dad just always let me taste it and smell it. And it was something that felt special, I think it's important to have those things that feel special in our lives. I will always have a bottle of bubbles in my fridge. It is sacrilegious for me not to have some sort of bubbles in my fridge and some, nice wine for a special occasion. Again, it's pleasure, it's joy. And then there are all those intellectual things and the reasons that I keep coming back to wine at different points in my life, because it never bores me. It's always interesting.
So let's talk about life before wine a little bit. Tell us about where you were born and raised and kind of your early life.
Yeah, I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. And raised in the Midwest. I grew up in a restaurant family. So my dad emigrated from Sicily along with 3 of his brothers. There were 4 brothers that grew up outside of Palermo. And I'm still very close with my family in Sicily. But 3 of the brothers came to the U.S. in the mid to late 60s, and they all started restaurants. It's the classic American dream story. They all came over with very little money. My dad literally came over with $35 in his pocket. And one brother came, kind of got a start, and then would bring the next brother over and, took care of them. And so I grew up in that environment of really hard work, but also the restaurants always closed on Sundays, and we always had Sunday family dinner, which looking back is really special. As an adult, you sort of realize, if you're working 6 days a week, you're tired on the 7th day. And I really have a lot of respect for my parents and my uncles and my family for making that time on Sundays for us to get together. It just shows how important that was for us. Yeah, and it was a fine dining Italian restaurant called Peppino's, and my dad and my mom opened it together in the mid-70s, and it was a time when Italian food wasn't really thought about as fine dining, and so they were doing some really different things, and at a time when it was spaghetti and meatballs and pizza. And my uncles had pizza restaurants and kind of the spaghetti and meatball thing, because it was a good way to, bring that to the masses at that time. But my dad went his own way a little bit, and he and my mom traveled extensively in Italy to research recipes and to try to create something really different. And they did. They served things that were very avant-garde for the time, especially in the Midwest. My dad has a great story about he cooked a whole octopus and brought it out to the table in Madison, Wisconsin in the 70s. And he brought it out to the table, and the lady at the table fainted. So it was definitely, they were a little bit ahead of their time. But I grew up around delicious food and wine, and and also really a sense of hospitality. You know, we talk about the product of wine as the wine industry, but the wine industry is at its heart hospitality. And I think that's just a key part of it. So that was really influential to me. So grew up in the Midwest, worked in the restaurant from the time I was 11 or 12 years old, peeling garlic, peeling giant buckets of shrimp. I mean, you name it, we did it. And I started helping out in the kitchen, but then eventually ended up being sort of front of the house, and really loved that. I enjoyed that hospitality and sort of being the face of that, you know. So yeah, a wonderful way to grow up.
You mentioned wine feeling like something special at that time in your life. Do you have any recollections of flavors, tastes, smells of that time, of the wine, or of a moment when you had something that felt kind of special in a way? Yeah,
so many. Well, my dad did something really special, which people do now as well, and that was he saved birth year wines for us. So that was really cool, and I thought he told me about that at a young age, and I remember thinking that was really, really interesting, and I still have some of those bottles and kind of slowly open them. So that felt special, and then I think just it felt like something that my taste and opinion was respected in at an early age. So I remember distributors coming in, mostly my dad did that more than my mom. I remember distributors coming in and pouring things. Funny how at a really young age that was part of my life, but I remember them pouring wines for my dad and my dad letting me take a sip and asking for my opinion of it and really respecting that opinion. And so that felt kind of special and important. And, I think it was definitely something that we had on special occasions. So that felt special. My dad was able to get some really great bottles at that time. And we would open them, on Christmas, on New Year's, when we got together with the whole family. So that felt really special too. It definitely felt like a special part of life, but also something that was part of our daily life. And I think that's what's great about wine is that there should be space in wine for both of those things. Like there should be the beautiful wines that are for those special occasions that you hold on to, but there also should be amazing wines for every day. And actually, I visited my family in Sicily quite frequently as a child and still do. I'm going there actually in about 10 days for a wedding. I'm so excited. But one of my earliest memories is with my Uncle Francesco, and he took me to a little cantina, and he had an empty gallon or 2-gallon jug, and we went and he poured it from the spout and filled it up with what he called vino nero, so black wine. Now I know it was probably Nero d'Avola, but that felt really interesting and unique and special too. So it felt like being let in on like a secret to do that with my uncle, who was a very sweet man, and a fun experience to have that at the table.
So as you're approaching the end of high school, tell me about kind of what you were thinking about for your future and what your sort of next step was.
I don't know if I had a set idea for my future. I did think a bit about hospitality and maybe doing something. I remember thinking maybe starting my own business was always like that entrepreneurial aspect was always part of my dream and my life. And I learned a lot from my dad, from my mom, and also from my uncles about how to start a business. And I think they did it at a time. Again, when you start a business with really no funding, and you also don't speak the language, you learn so much at an early age about how to do that. So I always had respect for that. Although I think when I ended up starting my own business, that respect, quadrupled, because you realize like, how the heck did they do this? Not speaking English. But yeah, I definitely always was entrepreneurial and wanted to start something on my own. But I don't know that I had a set path. Yeah.
So tell me about after high school. What was the next thing you did?
So after high school, I went to the University of Wisconsin at Madison. I'm a fourth generation Badger, and I studied Italian as a way to do study abroad programs more than anything. It's funny. I feel like today the college students I know are pressured to have such a set idea of what they're going to do, and it's expensive, and how they're going to use their education. But for me, that time in college was sort of a time to explore and see what was next.
So coming out of that, you mentioned kind of hospitality, wine, food, all kind of being things in your life at that point. Was it something you thought about coming out of school, or what was the first thing you did coming out of school?
So my university experience was kind of meandering. I was in school for a few years and then ended up moving out to San Francisco, where I worked in the wine industry as a buyer. I dropped out of school for a bit, which my family wasn't happy about, but in retrospect, it was a good experience because I think getting some work experience under my belt was just really helpful in terms of my appreciation for school and for education. And I worked at Cost Plus World Market, the flagship store in San Francisco, which is right by the wharf. And it was a different time when I worked there. I think it's become much more corporate now, but when I worked there, the buyers had quite a bit of say and independence in terms of choosing wines. And of course, I didn't start out buying there. I started out, just working there, kind of first job out of school. And pretty quickly, I worked my way up. I think I was hired as like an assistant manager because I had some management experience from the restaurant. And then I ended up managing the wine and gourmet department, which was a fairly large department at a young age. And, there was a big growth curve in terms of learning how to manage people in that environment. It was a union shop, so that was really different and a very good experience for me in terms of, learning how to manage people and having to be accountable in my early 20s. But it was a great experience. In San Francisco at that time, it was just such a wonderful place for the wine industry. There was so much happening, and being a buyer for a store like that, we had a fairly large budget, and we bought some wines that, it was a mix of wines that were sort of everyday wines. And then surprisingly, we had some, fine wines that were interesting. And there were a lot of characters from the California wine industry that would come into that shop. Like I remember meeting Mike Gergich and him, coming in, and he's definitely a very colorful character, and a lot of really interesting customers that would come in from North Beach. We had some really interesting people that came in and shopped from us. So it was a great experience, and it was a great place to get my feet wet in the wine industry. And the buying piece of it was a wonderful way to start as well, because I had access to really expand my palate and taste so many things. So growing up, I'd mostly tasted Italian wines and kind of developed my palate in that way. But this was learning how to be a bit more studious about it, and also learning how to taste wine as a professional versus as a consumer. So, we had a lot of people at that time who, it was the era of big buttery Chardonnay. And we had a lot of customers at that time who loved that, and it wasn't necessarily my favorite thing, but I learned how to taste through 10 different wines and decide which was the highest quality in that style, which is very different than a consumer tasting wine and determining what they like for their palate. And I took a lot of joy out of chatting with customers and really dialing into what they liked and trying to find them something that suited their taste or for a special occasion. So I thought that was really a fun part of it. That was a fun part of it. And then again, just the exposure to the California wine industry. I went to Sonoma and Napa a number of times, and it was exciting to be in your early 20s and you'd get things comped and get to get tours, and it felt really exciting and interesting. And I feel like the California wine industry at that time was so fascinating. It was really growing, and this was probably like early to mid 2000-ish, kind of early 2000s, I think. And I was there for about 4.5 years living in San Francisco. I had an apartment in North Beach, a teeny tiny little apartment in North Beach. And it was right when the tech industry was also starting to take off. So it was, the prices were going through the roof, but my landlord didn't realize this. So I was able to make it work. And I think I slept on I had a chair, like a pull-out chair that I bought at Cost Plus that I slept on for the first 2 or 3 months until I got a few paychecks under my belt. Stayed with friends when I first moved out there. But I went to San Francisco without a set idea of what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to work in wine, and I knew that was the place to be, to do that, and to be near the wine country. And it gave me that opportunity. Like I said, I met so many cool, interesting people. And I remember tasting with, one of my favorite experiences was tasting with a winery that doesn't exist. It was called Richardson Wines, and it was just this teeny tiny husband and wife operation. And I think we tasted out of, they had like an RV, and we tasted out of the back of it. And that was so new to me. You know, you went down kind of like what we were talking about earlier with Willamette Valley and the gravel roads. You know, that was one of the first times that I had driven down a gravel road and someone poured out something that they had made with love from their hearts. And that was really interesting to me and really captured my imagination.
So you said that you came to San Francisco specifically because you wanted to work in wine. What had triggered that? What made you think that was the step you had to take?
That's a good question, and I really barely remember that seems like such a long time ago. I think it just was so fascinating to me. So I'm definitely someone who likes, I have so many different interests. I've heard of the term multi-passionate, and I feel like that does really describe me because I'm interested in a lot of things. I have multiple hobbies and I like to travel. I like different things. And it felt like wine was someplace where I could be that person and be interested in different things and that it would be a benefit. I'd studied Italian in school, and it seemed like that would be a career where I could potentially use some of my Italian and, get a chance to travel a bit. So I think it was all of those reasons, but I was in my early 20s, why do we do something at that point, right? I think it is the time in your life to pick the path that's interesting to you and to kind of follow that. And there's a saying I love, it's the things that you're passionate about aren't random, they're your calling. And I think that's true. I think when we hear that voice in our head that says, keep reading about this, keep learning about this, I think there's often a reason why that happens. And that was wine for me always.
You mentioned, obviously, you were expanding your palate rapidly by tasting all these different kinds of wines and having to taste them in a different way than you had before. Tell me about, I suppose, building confidence in your decision making and feeling like you were confident in the decision you're making. You're buying the proper wine, you're making the right decision. How long does it take you to build confidence in something like that?
I think having that vote of confidence from my mom and dad at an early age, like my opinion was valued in the restaurant. It was valued when I was choosing wine. It was valued when I was working. I always felt like family came before business, and that it was a safe environment to make choices and to have those choices be respected. And so I feel like I came from a background that gave me a lot of confidence specifically in this realm. And then, I landed in a good place because the wine department, when I got there, had been struggling, and I was able to turn it around. And so that gave me a lot of confidence. The wine department started to do better, and I felt that I was doing a good job in picking wines that people were enjoying and giving good customer service and bringing that sense of hospitality. I think that, the wine industry at that time especially, now as well, but at that time in San Francisco, it was also very male dominated, and I was often the youngest person in the room, and I was often the only woman in the room buying. So I'm not quite sure why that didn't intimidate me more, but I just decided it wasn't going to, that I was going to do the best I could. And I would go to distributor tastings where there were so many wines, and it was easy to be intimidated. You have people from all over the world pouring beautiful Burgundies, beautiful Bordeauxs, and I'd never been exposed to that before, but I just decided to kind of fake it till I make it, right? And tried not to let that show. But there were times, I remember specifically, especially wine can be very intimidating, and if you think of the language that's used in the wine world, I didn't know. Yes, I'd been exposed to wine, but I didn't know the terms. I didn't know the language that was used around wine. And I've really tried to take that experience and that feeling. I have a very specific memory of being at a table of I think there were 10 of us, and I'd been invited to a dinner, some very upscale restaurant in San Francisco. I can't remember the name. But I'd been invited to a multi-course dinner. I was the only woman, table full of all men in their 40s, 50s, 60s. And that feeling of them using terms I didn't know. And instead of being intimidated by that, I've really tried to use that in the way I approach wine. Like when I write about wine for a client, or in the days when I was, working as a somm, I always tried to notice if they were feeling that way and not make them feel that way, because I didn't feel that way growing up. Wine wasn't a scary thing. It wasn't intimidating. And that's the Italian way of looking at wine, right? There's bread on the table, there's wine on the table. And one isn't necessarily more important than the other or fancier than the other. They're both appreciated and enjoyed. But then when you came I can see how someone who'd never been exposed to wine coming into the professional world of wine would have been really intimidated. So I've always tried to not do that, because it's not fun. It's not a fun feeling.
No, indeed. So you said 4.5 years at this job. Tell me about the prompt to take the next step.
Yeah, well, I think the prompt to take the next step was that I hadn't finished my degree, and I did want to finish it. It felt like unfinished business in my head, and it felt like something that was holding me back to not have my degree. So I moved back to Wisconsin and spent a year finishing my degree, and that was an incredible experience, because I think, again, when you're first in college, or some people maybe at that age are very structured, but I was not. But coming back to it after working, the idea of just being able to study, an interesting time in history at a cafe for 2 hours, that felt like vacation. I mean, after working retail where you have crazy hours and you're working really hard, I really appreciated that time, and I had some wonderful professors and finished my degree. My degree was in Italian, but it was more just to get a degree, liberal arts education. And then after I graduated, I was offered a job in the corporate office at Cost Plus. And so moved back to San Francisco. The office was in Oakland, and that was sort of my first corporate job. And, had the cubicle, and I was in the wine buying department, but I was helping to, it's such a long time ago now, but I remember I was also the water buyer, so I got to taste different waters and choose water, and the non-alcoholic buyer, and it was a very interesting experience, but I realized without a doubt that I was not made for corporate America. Being in the cubicle was just not healthy for me. It was not a fun experience for me. And I think I also realized at that time that I'm pretty purpose driven. I want to feel like I'm contributing to something that I believe in. And 9/11 happened at that time when I was in Oakland, and it was scary being in a big city like San Francisco, because the morning that happened, I got a call from my mom saying, don't go on the bridges. She was like, I don't care, quit your job, don't go on the bridges, don't. And at the same time, I got a call from my boss saying, people are still coming into work, come into work. I'm like, I'm not coming into work. And that left a bad taste in my mouth. And it also made me realize, I want to be able to say what feels right to me and what doesn't. And there was very much an emphasis on the best way we can support this country is by getting back to work and getting the economy going. And that didn't leave a great taste in my mouth. At the same time, I talked to my dad, and my dad was very upset, and he was putting a sign on the door for the restaurant. He's like, I won't open because it's disrespectful. I'm not going to open for business. So he had closed. And that was the moment where I'm like, I'm going to come back home and I'm going to work for my dad. So I worked in the restaurant business with him for, I would say, another 3 years. And that was, doing what I had done growing up, but doing much more of the management and much more of the, in kind of a more serious way, because I was older and I had some experience under my belt. And that was a great experience. It was a nice time to work with my dad, and, continued to learn a lot from him about the restaurant business. And worked there for a little while, and then kind of had the freedom and the time to think about what I wanted to do next. And I ended up, and this is where my career has taken so many different paths, I ended up practicing yoga a lot at this time and really falling in love with that. And I was going to a lot of different yoga studios and taking classes that were great, but there wasn't a sense of community or hospitality in the same way, specifically hospitality more than community. Like you'd come in and, you know, maybe the bathrooms weren't as nice as they could be. No one greeted you. And I think looking at it from the lens of like growing up in fine dining, I wondered to myself if that could be something that could translate to the world of yoga. Like you come in and it feels more spa-like. And I also thought about how different it was from, you know, a gym where you have a membership, because I had to pay for every single class, or I could buy a class pass, but it got to be kind of pricey if I wanted to practice frequently. So I thought about that as well. Could I do a business model where there's membership, so people can come whenever they want, there's a sense of community, and I'm able to bring that hospitality in as well. So I asked my dad for a small loan. In retrospect, I look back, I'm like, how did I get it going with that little? But, you know, a couple $1,000s. And I found a place to rent. And the whole family, in very Sicilian fashion, jumped in and helped. We all painted it. Actually, my grandma, who is gone now, and I think of her daily, she was in her, she was probably in her 70s at the time, and got on a ladder and painted for me. So the whole family kind of pitched in, and I got the business open, and my mom was a huge help. And she really helped to bring that hospitality to the yoga studio that I founded. It was called Bliss Flow Yoga. And we had tea every day. So people would come in and there was a thing of hot tea. We had, if business was slow, I'd ask my mom to make a batch of muffins to get people in, and I'd use social media and say, like, you know, come to the 6 o'clock class, we'll have muffins and tea. And it would always bring people in the door. But it was kind of, I had that business for, I think, 13 years total. And that was sort of my business boot camp, because I started it with very little, and I was able to grow it through marketing. And that gets to, you know, later in my career, when we get back to wine, marketing has always been a piece of it. And I think that was because for the yoga studio, I had to grow it and I didn't have a budget. And that was at a time when social media and email marketing, you could grow things a little bit more easily without having to invest in things like paid ads or, you know, invest a lot of money in SEO. I mean, you could do things more organically at that time. So it was a great way for me to experiment and to learn what worked and what didn't. And I really grew the business organically. At a certain point, about maybe 6 years in, I was able to hire someone who helped me with the business and ended up helping and bringing her own ideas to marketing. And I learned a lot from that as well. But at the very beginning, it was just sort of me. You could open a Facebook account for nothing and you could get the word out. And I thought it was very interesting. I know people like to malign social media, but when I think of like my dad starting his business, and having to pay a lot of money at that time for like a yellow page ad, right? I mean, that was how he advertised, or he'd pay for like a print ad. And it was really expensive for a small business owner. And then I think when I started my business, and even if it wasn't perfect, if I could get the word out organically without spending money, it made it more democratic. And I thought that to me felt really powerful. And so I was able to grow the business, and that interest in wine kept popping back though. And so when the business was rolling and, you know, I was able to step back a little bit from the daily operations, I decided to go and get my certified sommelier. And it was sort of just for fun, but I sort of knew that there was a voice in my head saying, you got to get back to wine. So I got my certified sommelier in 2010, a long time ago now, in Chicago, and studied for that. And that was a great experience. And then started to do yoga and wine retreats and yoga and wine classes. So I had connected with another yoga teacher and a friend of mine, David Romanelli, and he was doing these really interesting yoga and chocolate classes. And so the idea was that he partnered with Katrina Markoff, who's the founder of Vosges Chocolates. I think Vosges Chocolates now has been sold and she has another chocolate project, but that was when she owned Vosges. And David would do these amazing classes with music and like fun music. And then at the end of class, when you were really present, you would, kind of in a meditative state, take a few bites of chocolate. And it was really fun. And we got to chatting about wine and ended up developing yoga and wine workshops. That was sort of the start of it. And we did a retreat in Sonoma, which got featured in the New York Times. And that was a really, really big deal for a small business in Madison, Wisconsin. I got a phone call from the New York Times and I thought they were joking. I didn't think it was real, but it was, and they were calling to fact check. And we were on the front page of the lifestyle section, and that was really, really exciting. And it was a turning point for the business because getting that press through the New York Times then led to other local press. And it ended up, the business had been starting to take off, but it ended up giving the business much more stability and a larger client base. And it also gave us a reputation for being a yoga studio that was fun also, because it's funny, yoga and wine actually do have something in common, which is that they're both kind of intimidating. I think often when people would come into the studio, they'd say, oh, I'm not flexible, or, oh, I'm not going to be good at this. And so it was our job, my job, and then what I encouraged our teachers to do, to make people feel comfortable, to make people feel like they were welcome, and they didn't have to have some level. They could just, they didn't have to be pretzels. They could just come in and enjoy themselves. And the yoga and wine brought people that felt intimidated about both, actually, because I think by combining it, it seemed less scary. It seemed a little bit fun, maybe a little bit just silly, right? And that brought some new people to the table. So it started as just a workshop, but then we did the retreat in Sonoma, and I ended up doing yoga and wine retreats. I did one in Umbria, I did one in Amsterdam, one in Barcelona, one in Sicily, which was really beautiful because I spent time with my family first. And those were great experiences. It was a great opportunity to show people two things that I was really passionate about. And it was a great way to get my feet wet back in the wine industry. Eventually, I ended up selling my studio. Although actually, to back up just a little bit, towards the end of my studio, I had someone who was helping me to run it, so I was able to step out a little bit to do these retreats. And I got the idea that I wanted to work harvest. So I ended up working 2 harvests in Sonoma, which was such an incredible experience. And it really represents, working these harvests represent everything I love about the wine industry. So the first one was at Pots and Hall. And that had its challenges. So, as I said before, the wine industry can certainly be very male dominated. And I think you really find that in the cellar as well, especially at that time. I worked the 2012 harvest for Pots and Hall, and then the 2013 harvest for Bedrock Vintners. And the harvest for Pots and Hall had its challenges. There were 2 women on the team, myself and another lady, and we definitely dealt with some things that weren't very fun. Like, we dealt with being told that we didn't belong in the cellar because we couldn't lift a certain amount, or we didn't belong in the cellar because we couldn't do certain things. But at the same time, we worked incredibly hard, and there were things we could do that some of the big guys couldn't, like get me inside of a press or a tank and I can squeeze inside and clean it. So that was challenging, and I think it was both a reminder of why, as a woman, I needed to be in the wine industry, but also the challenges that you could face. But after working the 2012 harvest, that 2012 harvest, Bedrock was doing custom crush at Pots and Hall. So really the learning that I got for that harvest was more than anything from Morgan Twain Peterson at Bedrock Vineyards. And he is just an incredible person. And if you're not familiar with who he is, or Bedrock Wines, like, try them. They're incredible. He specializes in historic vineyards throughout California, of course, many of them in Sonoma, but by historic vineyards, like some of them were planted in the 1800s. And he took time to, even though he was doing custom crush, he took time to really talk to us about that and teach us about that. And his dad is Joel Peterson, who of course is the iconic winemaker who founded Ravenswood in the 70s, and is also just a wonderful human being. And that was probably the part of that harvest that was the most transformative for me. And also the sense of camaraderie with, some of the other people that were working there. There were challenges with certain people on the team, but there were also some people there that were very supportive and, knew I was there to learn and wanted to help me and wanted to be a part of that. But anyways, I, got to know Morgan and his dad, Joel, and I can't speak more highly about them and what a influential part they played in me being in the wine industry. And then in 2013, Morgan he'd gone from doing custom crush to moving into his own winery space and invited me to work harvest in 2013. And that was the best harvest experience of my life. It was an incredible experience. It was fun because the winery was barely built while fruit was coming in. We were probably doing some things that weren't like OSHA, OSHA certified, climbing up on ladders with all kinds of things. But it was a really fun experience. And what I loved about how Morgan teaches his harvest interns, he really wants you to learn the whole process of winemaking from the beginning to the end. And so I'm probably most interested in the viticulture. So he would send me out to do grape sampling. And it was such a cool experience because you'd be grape sampling at like these just incredible vineyards like Evangelo, which was planted in the 1800s. I mean, just unbelievable vineyards that, I'll probably never get a chance to work at again, but they were really treasures of California. And it was an amazing experience. And then in the cellar, he made sure that you went through every single part of the process instead of, the internship at Potts and Hall had been a lot of, which is okay. Like it's in an internship, it's all about learning, right? And you have to do the grunt work sometimes, but it was a lot of just like raking grapes as they came in. And that was fine. It taught you that 90% of winemaking is cleaning and hard work. But the experience in 2013 with Bedrock was incredible and just really underlined my love of the wine industry. And learning from Joel Peterson was wonderful too, because he had this, really deep background and all of these relationships in the wine industry. And I think that was something that I learned that really translates to the Oregon wine industry, is that concept of relationships. Like Joel had all of these relationships with growers over many, many, many years. And they had, they had such deep respect for each other, and they knew those vineyards so well. Even though he was purchasing from growers, he knew those vineyards incredibly well. And then Morgan, when he started Bedrock, he sort of inherited some of those relationships and then built and deepened them and developed new ones of his own. But it became really apparent how important relationships were. And even the relationships with us as interns, he did a wonderful job of making sure that we celebrated. Like I remember my last day of that harvest, he had beautiful grower champagne and fried chicken. And we had this like incredible celebration, but that was kind of how he ran the winery. And so I think I learned a lot of management things from him as well, just to always be teaching, to treat people really well, to make sure that people feel like it's a safe environment to ask questions and not feel dumb. And again, I can't speak more highly of that experience than of the two of them. They're just incredible human beings, and Morgan is making such beautiful wines. Again, highly recommended if you haven't tried them. So, and that's something really unique to the California wine industry. Like our old vines here are not old in that sense. So it was so cool to see that really profound experience. And they drink good wines. Morgan and his team, his partner, his business partner, Chris Cottrell, I mean, they brought some beautiful wines to the table, and to taste with, he's a master of wine, and to taste with someone that has that incredible of a palate also was a really good learning experience for me. Actually, I think now I don't, working more in marketing, I don't get to taste in such a studious way and with people who have such strong palates on a regular basis. And that's really how you learn. You need to taste with people that have incredible palates and, have knowledge, and taste with them on a regular basis. So I miss that. I feel like I've lost some of that, but that's life.
Coming into seeing the production side after so many years being around wine as a finished product, were there any surprises for you? Was there anything about the process of making wine that you were not prepared for? I
don't know if not prepared for, but I think it's more about how at its base, it's really about farming, and how much of it can be sort of left to Mother Nature and to chance, So I think that part of it was interesting to me. Those two harvests were both really good harvests where there wasn't, anything too scary weather-wise, but you knew that it's all very transient, right? And that's part of what makes wine so beautiful, is that we don't know if we're going to get a good harvest. So I think that was the thing that maybe didn't surprise me, but that experience sort of highlighted for me. And of course, just how much work it was. I knew it was going to be that, but then when you're working those long days, but I found it really exciting and just invigorating, and I felt like I learned about wine in a much deeper way. I loved working production. It was a lot of fun. It really was.
So tell us what came next.
So after that, I worked harvest. I had these retreats going on. That was all kind of happening at the same time. I ended up selling my business. When I worked harvest, I still had my yoga studio, but I was getting more and more drawn into a different life, and just knew I had sort of accomplished what I wanted to with my yoga studio, and it was time to move on to the next thing. And I had a longtime employee who was interested in purchasing it, so I sold it and kind of moved on to the next phase of my life. And I knew I wanted to work in wine, but wasn't quite sure what that was going to be. I ended up deciding I was just going to look for a job in wine in general, and I thought I had more background in hospitality than anything else. Like, as much as I loved working production, I thought I might be able to, build this next phase of my life better with hospitality, because I just had more experience with that. And I think coming from entrepreneurship, I thought that would be like sort of valued, and I'd started a business with very little, and I had built it and grown it into something successful and sold it. But I found that there was some resistance to that entrepreneurial. Not everyone wants to hire an entrepreneur. In retrospect, I can kind of understand why, because, I do like to do things in my own way. Probably not always the easiest person to manage because of that. But anyways, I did want to work for someone else, and I wanted to, I had such an amazing experience working for Morgan, and had really looked at him as a mentor, and I wanted that for this next phase of my career. So since I was having a hard time finding, the next thing and finding work, I decided to widen my search and to see, I knew I wanted to leave Madison. It was just kind of time for that. But I just got out a map. I circled any of the states that I would live in, and I started looking for work there. And I'd been intrigued by Montana. So in the meantime, I had started doing a little bit of horseback riding, and just getting more into, like I said, I have some wide-ranging hobbies, but getting more into horses. And I had purchased a horse, and knew that was, I wanted to be someplace where I could also bring my horse along. So Montana seemed like it could be kind of an intriguing place to live. And at the same time, my mom, who was a chef for many years, had partially retired. She's never really retired, never will, but we'll say partially retired, and from her job, as a chef. And she decided she was going to make the move with me, and she had a horse as well. So I got offered a job in Montana at a place called the Triple Creek Ranch. It's a Relais and Chateau property, as the wine director. And it was a great experience because the program was really good. I'd never worked as a wine director before, and so I think the fact that they were, kind of in the middle of nowhere, it was a little challenging for them to hire. So it seemed like a good opportunity and something that I could really turn into the next thing for me. So I took the position, and that was also a really great learning experience. So this was 2018-ish. Because I was there when the pandemic hit in 2020. But that was another position where I was a buyer, but I was also an on-the-floor sommelier. And I'd done that a bit at my father's restaurant, but this was quite different because it was such a large program, such a deep cellar. They had quite a deep Burgundy program, as well as a lot of high-end Napa cabs. And they had a really fun part of the program, too. So it was an all-inclusive resort very high end. And because of that, they included, they had a whole program of wines that were included with the price of the food came along. And so it was included with the price of that. And I had a budget of, I think it was $18 wholesale a bottle, which is pretty high for, wines that you can pour freely. And so I was able to really experiment with that. And they had sort of a slightly staid program of the by the glass before that. And I was able to really experiment, and I bought some cool Corsican wines, just anything that I wanted to experiment with. I would bring in by the glass, and that was fun to be able just to pour things for people and to see what they thought of it. Because if you're not paying for it, if it's included in the price, everyone was willing to try a taste or try a glass. So it was really cool to turn on people to, like, again, an interesting Corsican wine that no one's ever heard of when they were normally drinking Cabernet and Chardonnay. So I really enjoyed that part of it. And I also got the chance to go on a couple buying trips. In fact, when COVID hit in 2020, I was in Burgundy. And that was a really interesting experience. And again, all the things I love about the wine industry. So in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have gone at the time because, there were rumblings of sort of what was happening, but I really wanted to go to Burgundy, and I really wanted to go to Burgundy as a buyer. Again, in retrospect, probably not the smartest decision, but, you can't really experience Burgundy as a tourist in the same way. Like, I was able to get access to some incredible cellars and try things and have an experience that was really unique. But then, towards the end of my week there, on Saturday, I was out to dinner in Burgundy, and where was I? I think I was in Beaune, and the waiter came and announced that the whole country was shutting down at midnight. This was like at 8 o'clock at night. And in a very French way, everyone in the restaurant was like, more wine. And everyone ordered more wine. And I know, really funny, right? I think in America, we would have all been like running for the exits, but nope, they're like, let's have more wine. And the next day I had an appointment in Chablis. It was a Sunday morning. I had an appointment. I forget the name of the producer now, but I had an appointment in Chablis, and I didn't have the person's contact number. And so I didn't know how to reach out to them to say, is our appointment still on? But I really wanted to go to Chablis. So I decided to just drive there, kind of see what happened. And when if worse comes to worse, I'll at least see Chablis and say I'd been there. But the producer knew that everything was closing, and so he'd had his wife prepare lunch for us. And it was such a beautiful gesture. And then the next day, I was trying to get out, and the next day I had an appointment, or later that afternoon, I had an appointment with with Becky Wasserman's import group. And it was the same thing. They knew everything was closing, and they had a meal for us. And it was just that incredible hospitality of like, the world is kind of falling apart right now, and we're not sure what's happening, but we're going to take good care of you. And it's, again, all the things I love about wine, that sense of camaraderie and community. And, at the time, no one really knew we were all kind of scared, and we didn't know what to do, but everyone was so hospitable and lovely. And it's actually a really special memory. I loved being in Burgundy. But I came back to Montana, and the ranch closed for a period of time. And then the ranch reopened fairly early. I would say we were closed for maybe 2 or 3 months. And so it was a strange experience to be in hospitality post-COVID. And it was something that I decided I didn't want to be in. Again, I think with hospitality also, it can be so challenging. The hours that you work and sort of the life that you have can be really beautiful. Like all the things I love about hospitality, like the feeling of pouring a wine for someone that they'd never had before and they love it. The feeling of being part of people's celebrations. That's all so beautiful and great. The sense of camaraderie, like having a beer with the people that you've just worked a really busy Saturday shift with at the end of the day, like, at the end of the night. That's something that you can't get in any other industry. Well, sometimes wine at the end of harvest, right? But then the lifestyle itself was challenging. Like, working as the wine director, I would basically work 2 shifts because in the mornings I would get up and do my research. Maybe starting at noon, I'd have appointments with distributors, and then I'd work the shift on the floor and not get done until midnight, 1 in the morning. And that was taking a toll on me. I think that's something that you can do in your 20s, but as you get a little older, it's challenging. And I think it leads to a lot of issues with mental health in hospitality. And, you know, I was lucky because I was very, very set on being professional when I was as wine director and as kind of, you know, the boss of the wine program. So I drank very little, but, you know, it was challenging because you could see that people were maybe drinking too much after a shift or, you know, living a lifestyle that wasn't very healthy. And it was just not something I wanted to be a part of anymore. And I think also hospitality after COVID, especially someplace like Montana, you know, not everyone agreed with wearing a mask, and I felt like I was maybe putting myself a bit at risk, and it just wasn't a good feeling anymore. It had been a great experience, and I'm really glad I spent that time in Montana. Montana's an absolutely stunning place, and the Triple Creek Ranch had an incredible wine program. But, you know, it was a moment to move on to the next thing. But I think out of all of it, it was the on-the-floor work as a somm. That is a really good training for anyone, and it was a really great learning experience for me. I really enjoyed that piece of it a lot. We did some cool things too. They did chef's tables, which were really fun. I love food and wine pairing, and I loved being able to collaborate with the chefs on that. And then we started a new program while I was there where we did just full-blown tastings with people, and they were custom tastings. Because it was an all-inclusive resort, you could just play in a different way than I think at a restaurant that is really watching the bottom line. So that was a really cool experience too. But I ended up, so that gets us, finally we're almost in Oregon. That gets us to Oregon, and my mom had moved with me to Montana, and she decided to kind of come along on this next adventure with me. And I thought I would move back to Sonoma. So this was 2020, pandemic is raging, and then I had, you know, hired moving trucks, and it was right when the fires broke out in Sonoma. And I said to myself, am I going to bring my mom and my horses into a raging fire? No, probably not. So I decided to just kind of play it by ear. I literally had the movers. We decided the movers were going to take stuff to storage for a little while until we figured out where we were. And I had stuff packed in my car. My mom came along with me. Someone watched the horses in Montana for us until we figured out like where we were going to land. And I said, well, we'll just take a little break. We'll go someplace else until the fires die down in Sonoma. The little break turned out to be a number of years, and here I am still in Oregon. But I looked on Instagram, and I saw a picture of seeing all these like smoke-filled pictures from Sonoma. And I saw a picture on Instagram of the Oregon coast, and it was like blue skies, was, you know, clear. And I said, you know what? We're not that far from there. Let's just go there for a week and take a vacation, and we'll figure out what we're going to do with, you know, what we're going to do with the rest of our lives. So we went to the Oregon coast, and the fires in Sonoma were still raging, and it was really scary, especially having lived there. Sonoma is someplace that's really like very dear to my heart, and it was really so heartbreaking to see what was happening. But I also knew it wasn't going to die down soon, and I couldn't just vacation in Cannon Beach endlessly, although we'd all like to, right? So I thought about it, I'm like, we're near the Willamette Valley, and it's almost harvest. This was, you know, September. I'm like, I wonder if anyone's hiring for harvest. And that is a good life lesson to anyone who's listening. If you don't know what to do, there's always harvest, right? There's always harvest. And harvest, usually working a harvest, doesn't matter what point you're at in your life, working a harvest will set you right. You work hard, you clear your mind, you meet people. It's an amazing experience. So I went to, we drove through the valley, and first place we got to was Newburgh. And I Googled local wine store. Valley Wine Merchants came up. And I went in, and Andrew, who I, you know, now know and buy wine from at any chance, I walked in and I said, hi, I'm new here. You know, do you know anyone who's looking for harvest help? He gave me 3 names. Within 48 hours, I had 3 interviews, and then I got a job. And I ended up working harvest. It was a joint harvest in 2020 for Bjornson and Harper Voigt, and met some incredible people. I can't speak highly enough of Patty Bjornson and Mark. They're just incredible people, and working for Scott, their winemaker, I learned a lot, and it was a really fun experience, and kind of, again, dipping my toes into the Oregon wine world. Unfortunately, it was a heartbreaking harvest as well. And I think of all the, hard work we put into it, and most of the wine, of course, ended up going down the drain. But that's farming, right? Sometimes things don't work out the way we want. But it was still an incredible experience. And I ended up asking around and getting a job as the DTC director at Nicola J. And so that was sort of my first professional gig in the wine industry here in Oregon. And I loved the connection to Burgundy and to, the work that Jean-Nicolas Mayo was doing in Burgundy. And I thought the wines were fantastic. I was just absolutely in love with the wines, and they are fantastic. And so I worked there for about a year and a half-ish. And, really, really wonderful experience, and a great learning experience. And I helped them, this was early on before the tasting room opened. So helped them with getting the tasting room program started, and kind of developing some of the tastings, and learned a lot from that experience. The two owners both bring so much to the table. Of course, Jean-Nicolas brings so much wine knowledge and just his French sensibility to Oregon. And of course, Jay, coming from the music industry, had, a whole different management style, and, brought so many interesting things to the table in that. And I think they have such an incredible story, the story of friendship, and a story of kind of that French connection here in the Valley, which is such an important part of the Willamette Valley, and something I really enjoyed and loved. But I ended up deciding that entrepreneurship was the path I was going to take. And so I ended up leaving there about a year and a half in, and starting a small business with my mom, a skincare business. We started that, and and at the same time that we started that, we started looking for some farm property, and ended up purchasing our farm here, which it's in Amity and about 10 acres. And we've got a little orchard and the horses here. So really sort of during that time settled in the wine industry. And the business is still going, but I definitely needed to, after about a year of that, I needed to move on to something else in addition to that. So I ended up, we're quite near Van Duzer Vineyards, and I ended up getting a marketing job with Van Duzer Vineyards. And that was the first time in my career. I was really grateful for that opportunity. And that was the first time in my career that I had really had the opportunity to just focus on marketing. I think that's true of the wine industry, right? Every position, because people, are struggling and doing their best to make do with less resources, right? Every position in the wine industry, you're doing 20 different things. So my position at Nicola J, I did marketing for them, but I also was running the tasting room, and I was also doing tasting. So it was challenging to really focus on marketing. When I was running even not in the wine industry, when I was running my yoga studio, marketing was one piece of it, and it was a necessary thing. Like, I had to have people coming in the door. I had to make payroll. So I had to find a way to do that through marketing. But with Van Duzer, this position really allowed me to just work on marketing in and of itself. And that was a really cool experience, because I got to just focus on how do we sell wine? How do we bring people into a winery? How do we position? What is the brand like? And Van Duzer was a unique brand challenge in that it's a legacy brand, 25-year-old brand. And to tell that story, and to tell kind of a unique story about place and the Van Duzer corridor and the wind, it was really fun. And it was really, it had its challenges, and it was, in terms of a brand that maybe people had sort of forgotten about and hadn't really paid attention to for a while, and bringing that back to people's attention and kind of shining it up and polishing the brand. But I really enjoyed that. But as you can see, there's sort of I keep getting pulled back to a couple things: wine and entrepreneurship. And that brings us back to now. And a year ago, I quit my job at Van Duzer and ended up starting my own consulting firm, Fresh Take Creative. And it really was born from the idea that there are multiple wineries and multiple other businesses that need a little help with marketing. Like I said, I'd been in that position. I really love the idea of working for different clients, and it's actually developed the majority of my clients are in the wine world, but I'm starting to expand into clients in different fields, specifically in family business, which is really interesting, having grown up in family business. But what I saw is that you had winery owners that, just as I had been as a business owner, had so many things to deal with in their everyday life and didn't necessarily have the time or the bandwidth or the desire to work on marketing. But it's such an important piece of the puzzle. And I think as we talk about, a lot of doom and gloom about the wine industry right now, right? So much doom and gloom. But I think that if marketing doesn't happen, like if we're not taking that part of it seriously, doom and gloom does arise. Like, we have to take that seriously. We have to start thinking about how to market wine in a different way for new generations and how to make it accessible to people, how to keep the romance of it. All the things that we haven't necessarily had to do as an industry, right? It doesn't work anymore to just say, like, I make great wine and people should just come to it and discover it. That's not working, and it hasn't worked for a while. And so to have a bit more sophisticated marketing and to think about how we're going to use social media, email marketing, the number of wineries that are still relying on old ways to market is kind of astounding. And so there's a lot of wineries that are struggling, and it breaks my heart as someone who grew up in small business, because I think that if we collectively start leveling up our marketing and start using more sophisticated, more modern marketing techniques and ideas, we can get the wine industry back on track. I think there's always going to be a market for connection and for something beautiful and for something that comes from the earth, but we have to tell that story. We can't just rely on, the things we used to rely on, like word of mouth. It's not that time anymore. So I felt really passionate about bringing what I was doing to a larger audience, and being able to work with small businesses and really help them grow, because I'd been in that position and I know how challenging it is to do all of those things, so that was really why I founded it. I wanted to be able to help small businesses grow their businesses through their marketing. And I like to work with businesses that I believe in, that I want to see continuing, and to try to help them learn how to grow their business. So I look at what I do more than just marketing as helping someone grow their business and helping them develop their brand. And I know brand is a word that people sometimes think is like fluffy, or they don't know what it means, but I think it's really like the DNA of who you are as a business and what matters to you other than the product you're selling. So for wine, what matters to you more than just the wine? Like, does it matter to you that your employees are taken care of? Does it matter to you that you're taking good care of the earth? Like, that's sort of what makes up the DNA of a brand. And if we can share that with people in marketing, it's not just about being salesy. It's about really talking about what matters to you as a business owner and how we convey that to the community. So I think that's important, and it feels really good to be working with a number of different businesses and helping them grow their business. And we can do that in a way that, again, is not salesy. And I think that's where, with the wine industry, often people are like, well, I don't want to bombard people. And I think we have to speak up a little bit louder about what we're doing. We have to speak up about how we're taking good care of the planet. We have to speak up about why it's important to gather with friends over something beautiful, whether it's wine or food. So to me, that doesn't feel salesy or like advertising. It just feels like protecting something that I care about.
So you mentioned obviously family business and growing up in a family business and seeing now working with a lot of small family businesses. Tell me about the kind of general issues you see when you have a small family business, whether it's in wine or something similar to that. What is the most common thing that is missing that you feel like you and Fresh Take Creative kind of step in and take care of?
Yeah, well, I think it's giving people a little more time and space for family, and also telling that story. So one of my favorite people to work with, and I met her through Nicola J, is Tracy Kendall and her husband Aaron Kendall, and they founded Folly of Man recently, and I do the marketing for them. And they are very much a family business in that it's a husband and wife doing it together, and also in the fact that they have small children that they bring out to the winery and that are a part of everything they do at the vineyard and just a part of every aspect of their life. And so to me, that feels very similar to how I grew up. You know, I grew up and we weren't left at home with a babysitter when my family was cooking. We were just kind of brought along, you know, and we helped and we did stuff. And I see that in what Tracy and Aaron are creating. So, but that's really challenging, you know, with that in mind. Like the other day, it was one of the first picks for someone she's consulting with, and her son got sick. You know, it's like she's got a lot on her plate. It's really challenging. And so if I can help take the marketing off of her plate, and off of Aaron's plate, that feels really rewarding for me. So I think some of like the family business thing is just about balance more than anything else. And also telling that story, because I think that, and of course, not everyone wants to share their children being part of a business, but Tracy, I think, feels really proud of it. And I completely feel at home with that because, again, that's how I grew up. But I think sharing that it's a family business in the sense of marketing is really important, because I know for me as a consumer, that's who I want to support, right? I want to support the small family business. I want to support the wine that's being made out of love and passion. And that's what most family businesses are. You know, and those are the kind of businesses that I want to support and grow. Did that answer your question? I forget what the question was. Okay.
So do I. Yeah, I'm sure it did. No, it was. I was curious because I feel like you mentioned kind of businesses having kind of being behind and kind of in the same way. A lot of them are kind of missing an element that you were bringing to the table. So I think you answered that very, very.
Yeah, well, I think there's a fear if when it's a family business, it's really like precious to you. You know, especially with the kind of businesses we're talking about here in the Willamette Valley, right? The small family businesses are indeed small family businesses, and I think you don't want to feel like you're trying too hard or you're being salesy, but there's a way to tell those stories that is really appealing to people without being salesy. Mm-hmm. And I think there's so much talk in the wine industry right now about appealing to different demographics, you know, especially like younger demographics. And I've been in conferences before where, you know, people will kind of flippantly say like, I don't want to be on TikTok, so I can't appeal to the younger generation. And I so strongly disagree with it. It's not about TikTok. Like, great if you want to be on TikTok. Like, I'm all for that. And I should be getting even more of my clients on TikTok. But it's not about TikTok. It is about purpose. You know, the younger generations want to support a business that takes care of their employees, that takes care of the environment. They want to support a business that has purpose and a story and authenticity. And what's frustrating to me is that many of the wineries that we're talking about that kind of hesitate to do too much marketing have an incredible story. I'm like, all you need to do is tell that story in an authentic way. But there's like a fear of doing that. I think some of it can be about not feeling like they know how to do it. So I think there's a lack of like knowledge about it. But then I think some of it is almost just a fear of putting themselves too front and center and being salesy. But again, we are in a period in the wine industry where we need to fight, and we need to make sure that we are, you know, really fighting hard for the businesses that we believe in, you know, and that's really important as a community. And I love the Oregon wine community. I feel like I've been here now 5 years, and this definitely feels like home in a way that I think, you know, other than, of course, where I grew up, but in a way that no place else has. And I think it is the community of people and the support. So to me, starting my business was really just a natural thing to happen, a natural progression in that. Yeah, it's a really special industry. It's a really special community here in the Willamette Valley, especially the women here in the Willamette Valley. I feel like there is a network of women that really support each other. And that's been one of the greatest joys since I moved here. You know, like, again, Tracy being one of the people who has been both a friend and a mentor and a colleague to me. But there are so many women that I could name that have been so supportive and really like lift up other women. And I think that's why we have more women winemakers than other areas of the country or the world. But it's something that I just feel so honored to be a part of, and something that I want to support.
So you talked about, obviously, an interesting time right now in the wine industry, internationally, globally, and Oregon also. Tell me about what you're seeing from your perspective right now in selling wine and getting people excited about wine, and where does the wine industry go in the next few years? What are the key steps that needs to be taken?
I think what I'm seeing makes me feel really hopeful, because for example, the clients I have that are really pushing to do interesting, unique things are the ones that are seeing success. So that tells me that when you do that, you can find success. The people that I see struggling a bit more are the ones that are doing the same thing year after year. If you're still doing the exact same club party that you've done for the last 5 years, no other industry can get away with that, and I really believe in looking outside of our industry for best practices. So I spend a lot of time looking at what's the spice industry doing, what's the coffee industry doing, what's the beauty industry doing, what's the fashion industry doing, because we have to, as an industry, level up. We have to look at best practices outside of our industry and what we're doing. And I think the people that are doing that are succeeding. I was at Willamette Valley Winery Association just held a marketing boot camp, and they did a session talking about how to promote events, which was really well done, and they did a great job with it. But there was a lot of talking about how events just aren't selling anymore. And again, the clients I have that are doing things that are unique and outside of the box and different, and partnering with like interesting restaurants in Portland or interesting influencers, those are the people that are having sold out events still. So I really do believe it's possible, but we cannot just use the same playbook. We have to, and that was sort of the name Fresh Take Creative. Like, you have to have a fresh take on this, and you have to really think about how you can do things differently than you have. And the cool thing about small businesses, and this is how I felt when I had my yoga studio, is that you do have space to experiment. A lot of times you can experiment for not that much money because it's you doing the work. I mean, it stinks if you experiment, you spend hours on something and it doesn't work, but there's a freedom in that we need to be embracing. So as far as where the industry is going, I think that's really up to us, right? It's up to us as an industry. Are we going to choose to modernize our marketing? Are we going to choose to level up or not? But I think there's, I don't think wine has been around for thousands of years. I don't think we're about to disappear. I think it's just a different moment in time, and everything ebbs and flows. But it's definitely a time to, again, I'll use this word again, to really like fight for your business. You cannot expect business to just come in. You have to fight for it. So, and that's going back to, I look back at my dad and my uncles, and, my mom has had multiple businesses over the years, and all of them started with very little. And I think when you come from that perspective of like kind of the bootstrapping entrepreneurial perspective, you don't have time to wait. You have to really fight. And I think the wine industry is in an interesting place too, because, I've talked a lot about small family business, but at the same time, there are a lot of wineries now that have been purchased by large corporations and that are owned by people with a lot of resources. And that can be really also kind of scary as a business owner, because you have to fight against people that have many more options and resources than you do. But I go back to that idea. I do believe that a good story authentically told can give you a competitive advantage. So if you are a winery owner that feels like you can't compete against, a winery that's owned by a giant multinational company, or a winery that's owned by someone with, tremendous resources or wealth, I do believe you can. I think you can make great wine, you can tell a great story, but you have to really focus in on what that story is and telling it authentically. And we can't be above marketing, we can't. We have to, if you want to stay in business, you really have to tell that story and find a way to do that and make that a priority. And you have to make great wine. You can't, one is not enough. You have to do all those, we have to do all those things. We have to have incredible hospitality. We have to have a beautiful space. We have to have good marketing. We have to treat our people well. All of those things have to happen. And I know how tough that is. But I do believe in the wine industry. I think the things that are good about the Oregon wine industry, that community and camaraderie, I think we will get through this, challenging time for sure. I'm going to be optimistic.
Appreciate that. Tell me, you mentioned story a lot, and I think that's something that obviously comes up a lot, especially now that the Oregon wine industry has grown to the size it is. There are a lot of stories. Yeah. Tell me what makes for a good story. What do you look for when you're trying to tell someone's story? What is it that draws you in as a colleague or as a client? And what is it that you find appeals to customers?
Yeah, I think you need to find what is most unique. So I have a friend who does a lot of branding work, Lindsay Morse, and she's done a bunch of stuff with PSU and also with some different wineries, Stoller and Adelsheim here in the Valley. But she uses the term ownable. So you want to find a story that is ownable, that can be only told by you as a winery. So if you are a winery owner listening to this, really think about what makes you unique. There are a lot of places with beautiful views, but what makes your view unique? Is it because it's a 360-degree view? Is it because you can see Mount Hood? I know that sounds really specific, but finding the parts of your story that are unique to you is really important. And then I think telling the story authentically, don't assume that people just know things about, your story. So for example, if you are doing some kind of interesting organic farming technique that no one else is doing, don't be afraid to pull out your camera and do a little video about it. It can be really interesting to people. So I think that's part of it. And then I think also thinking about, there's the story about the winery itself. There's the origin story. What type of wines do you make? Tell us about the winemaker. And that is very important, to tell an authentic, real story about that. But there's also the story that we miss as an industry, and that's about the client. So we are often not very client-centered. We need to think about how, if someone is buying a bottle of your wine, what are they drinking it with? Where are they drinking it with? Can you tell that story so they can envision it in their life? And that's really what I think of as lifestyle marketing, and it's something that we don't do a ton of in this industry, and I think we have to start thinking about that. And that's where, going back to the idea of the wine industry being intimidating, I know this is going to be controversial and everyone's going to say it matters, but things like scores to me matter less and less. And they matter less and less to me because I think they matter less and less to a younger generation. So the idea of constantly talking about scores or, really in-depth tasting notes or things that are super technical, there's a time and place for that. And I can get as nerdy as the next person. But I think that we also have to remember that the average person doesn't care what the pH of a wine is. They want to know going back to my Italian heritage, they want to know, what do I drink it with? What occasion do I serve it with? Am I going to look dumb if I serve this at a party, or are people, that's truly what people think about. I think scores help for that because it's like a safety net. If you see that it's 90 or above, people will be like, oh, that's a safe thing to bring to the party. But beyond that, do they care what a reviewer who's 3 times their age thinks of it? I don't think so. And again, I know that's a bit controversial and people will disagree with me on that, but I think it's telling the client's part of the story too. So both pieces are important.
So you've brought up obviously your many hobbies, your multi-passionate passions. Tell me about what's next for you. Where does Fresh Take go next? What are you hoping for with it? And is there anything else on your horizon that you're excited about, enthusiastic about, want to try?
Yeah, I am really excited about where Fresh Take is going. So this is almost exactly my 1 week anniversary of or 1 year rather anniversary of the business. And I've hired 2 young women to work for me. One is doing content creation and the other one helps a lot with everything from email marketing to helping us grow and stay organized. So I feel like the business will continue to grow, and I'd like to continue to grow it always as a boutique marketing agency, but I'd like to see more growth and, continuing to work within the wine industry, but also working in other industries, just because that keeps me intellectually stimulated. And also because I learn a lot. Just as I was saying, the wine industry needs to look outside of itself at what other industries are doing. It's really cool when I have clients that aren't in wine and I can kind of take and translate that back into the wine industry, and and vice versa. So I'm really looking forward to just continuing to grow the business and seeing where it goes, and also to do more with brand work, because I think that's something that's not as well understood. So I do retainers where I'll help people execute their marketing, whether it's social media or email marketing. But I also love the brand work. I love that, sitting down with owners and key players and really determining what their brand is outside of just the product or service that they sell. So I look forward to doing more of that. And yeah, I just, more than anything, I just look forward to seeing this community that we've created in Oregon continue to grow. And it's certainly a scary and challenging time for people right now. But I think that the little things, the little pleasures, the little luxuries in life still really matter, because they're what gives our daily lives meaning, and they're what help us step aside from all of the upsetting news and the things that are happening in the greater world. So I think it really does have value, and I think that's a really important part of what we're creating and building here in the Valley. It's not frivolous, it's important because it's really what makes our daily life worth living, and it reminds us of those little pleasures and joys and connects us to the earth, and it's important for that reason. I did on one of my retreats to Italy, one of the yoga and wine retreats, we went to Sicily, and we went to this beautiful orchard that had like 500-year-old olive trees and lemon trees. And we were traveling with a woman from New York, and she looked up at the lemon tree and she was like, "Lemons grow on trees?" And I know that sounds, I'm not saying this to make fun of her at all. Like, she'd grown up in New York and she'd seen lemons in the store, and it just never, I think she kind of blurted it out, but she'd never really seen that before. And I think that same kind of experience can happen at a winery. Someone comes to visit and they see grapes growing on vines, and they see hands doing that work. And I think what that does is it helps connect us to the earth. So I feel like we're doing a really important service, because people come someplace like the Willamette Valley and they come to a winery and they see that the seasons matter. They see that, people work to take care of vineyards. They see all of that, and it hopefully connects them to our environment in a different way. Like, it might seem frivolous, but I don't think it is. I think it really does matter.
Last question for you. Tell me about what you're proudest of. What's your greatest accomplishment so far, or what's something you look back on with pride?
Gosh, that's a hard one, Rich. I'm just really proud to be part of the family I'm a part of, and to be part of the community I'm a part of. I really do value that. Like, I value my friends, I value my family. And, I think I try to work really hard, but I'm proud of the fact that I balance that and make time for the people that matter to me. So I think that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, is my relationships. Like, I'm really close with my family. I'm really close with my friends. For only being here 5 years, I feel like I've made just incredible friendships here, and I'm really proud of that. Like, I try to really nurture those relationships, and I am proud of the fact that those are more important to me than the other stuff that we can get caught up in.
All right. All the questions that I have for you today. Anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything?
I think we covered so much. Thank you so much for taking the time, and for the work that you're doing to document all the things that are happening in the Oregon wine world.
Thank you for that, and thank you so much for offering us this beautiful space on a beautiful day here in September, on the eve of harvest.
Yes.
And thank you for sharing your story with us. We'll go ahead and let you off the hook. Thank you. Thanks.